everyone, my name is Seema Alexander. I'm coming to you live again from the WeWork in downtown Washington, D.C. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the founder and chief strategy officer of Disruptive.CEO. It's a strategic advisory firm for visionary founders and companies who are in growth and scale mode. And I also have the honor and pleasure to be this year's curator for the growth track for the DC Startup Week community. So there are about over 16 panels out of the 100 that are focused on workshops and panels like this dedicated to growth-focused entrepreneurs and founders. So for those of you who are new to DC Startup Week, it's a 5-day completely free conference every September focused on providing regional entrepreneurs with content-rich agendas and networking opportunities to help you grow and scale your business. I'm telling you, this year, I think we got very lucky. We have amazing speakers, amazing workshops. Maybe it was the COVID effect. I don't know what it was, but we're really, really excited to see our agenda and provide it to you guys. So before I introduce the panel, I wanted to give a quick shout out to our title sponsors. We could have not done this without you and all of our other sponsors. And Next, Insperity, Wiz, and Technology Rivers. Thank you so much. So we are excited to have Anil Hemrajani. He's the founder of Startup Sidekick, moderate this critical conversation around moving into this after pivoting, right? And in the process of going through what we just went through with COVID, right? There are a lot of companies right now that are in pivot mode. It's become the biggest buzzword around, if you will. But there are companies that are surviving, and then there are others that are thriving. And so this conversation is with 3 founders that are focused on and found ways to grow in the midst of what we call the COVID chaos. So with that, we have a great treat in store for you. We have Ronit Avni, the CEO of Localized, Janna Westbrook, the CEO of Provider Pool Company, and David Simnick, the CEO and co-founder at Soapbox and the managing partner in Impact Driven Brands. They're all going to be sharing their stories and strategies, how they made their pivot work for them in these uncertain times. The one just logistics thing, if you have any questions throughout the talk, please use the chat function and put in all caps question and put your question after. And Anil will later on in the conversation start to address some of those as much as he can. So with that, please welcome Anil to the DC Startup Week stage. Anil?
Hey, thanks, Seema. Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to this panel titled The Post-COVID Effect, Growth in the Midst of Chaos. My name is Anil Hemrajani. I'm the moderator of this panel. The purpose of this panel is really to discuss how these 3 startups are dealing with growth. And we've got some really impressive founders here, so I'm really looking forward to an engaging conversation. And what you can expect, this format is basically, we're gonna do some initial intros real quickly. I'll kick off the conversation, and in the second half, we can open it up to audience questions. And as Seema mentioned, when you guys post your question in the chat window, just use uppercase question and prefix that. And speaking of the chat window, before we start with the bios, just kind of a quick poll on how many entrepreneurs are out there and what you're looking to get out of this panel. If you could just kind of post that in the chat, that would be great. So we're going to go around and do really quick bios here, just like 1 minute each, since Seema has already introduced us briefly. I'm the founder of Startup Sidekick. It's an online community dedicated to making tech startups successful. As you can tell, I'm bald, and I'm a serial entrepreneur, and that's what startups have done to me. But so basically, I started this company because after fumbling to successful exits in the 2 startups, I just realized that 90% of startups fail out there, and so that's what we're trying to do, is to kind of prevent that from happening. So I'm just going to go around really quickly, just starting with David, and then Janna and Ronit. If you could just give like a 1-2 line bio about yourself and what your startup does, that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. First and foremost, it's a humbling honor to be here. We are Soapbox. Impact owns 4 different consumer companies. Soapbox is our biggest. We make body wash, shampoo, conditioner, liquid hand soap, and probably something that you guys have seen all too much of is hand sanitizer. And we got some pretty funny stories of what's happened over the past 7 months.
Excellent. And you guys have been around for what, like 10 years or something like that?
Exactly. Yeah. So I made the first batch of soap in my college kitchen at American University, which it basically looked like Breaking Bad. My landlord actually thought I was making meth. That was fun. But no, we're a mission-driven company. Every time someone buys one of our products, we have the honor of working with various different 501c3s, both here at home and around the world, to donate soap and hygiene supplies to those who need it most.
Excellent. Thank you. Janna?
Hey everyone, I'm Janna Westbrook. I'm a registered nurse with a passion for the healthcare workforce. I created Provider Pool as a nurses on demand platform for the senior care industry. So Provider Pool functions as a labor marketplace where healthcare organizations like hospitals and nursing homes can hire local and travel nurses essentially on demand.
Excellent. Thank you. Ronit?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ronit Avni, and I'm the founder and CEO of Localized. And we are a career tech company that connects university students and recent graduates to industry experts to guide them and employers to hire them. And our main focus has been emerging markets.
Excellent. Thank you. So start with, I can guess which one of your companies is more virtual and more physical, right? I mean, with David's company, but like, can you guys describe like how much of your company is virtual? Ronit, I mean, I'm just wondering if yours is 100% virtual, and with David, is it just the opposite? So can you guys tell me a little bit about
100%. We've always been virtual. Everything we do is virtual, remote team. So yes, I would say remote native as a company.
All right. And David, I know you've got a lot of physical products, but you obviously need software and things to manage. So how much of it is physical versus virtual?
Oh man, it's weird because this year we doubled, tripled, quadrupled down with current customers. So we sell our products in Wegmans, Rite Aid, Walgreens, CVS, Giant, Publix down south, Amazon, Grove, Walmart.com, Meijer, a ton of locations, and a ton of different retailers. But we expanded into whole new verticals, just because, for us, and I'll make this super short. We had the relationships on the supply side. So we work with well over 11 different factories throughout the United States. And then we had all the relationships with the buyers. So we know the Walgreens team, we know the CVS team, we know, these individuals on a first name basis, and they know us. So when the supply chain completely froze up back in March, there was so much trust on both sides. And that's how we were able to expand so quickly. But then we're now in food service, we're now in medical, we're now in the office channel. All three of those we were not in pre-COVID.
Wow. Yeah, so this has definitely presented opportunities for you as well, and we'll come back to that. And Janna, I mean, you deal with, such a people-based business with nurses and all that, but, I'm sure you also have software to manage all of this. So how much of it is physical versus virtual?
Business operations are completely virtual. My team is fully remote from the East Coast to the West Coast, but obviously our marketplace nurses go in the facility. I think pre-COVID, I had a relationship with our healthcare organizations where I would go in and, buy them lunch and things, but now it's completely virtual. I have Zoom meetings with my account managers, and yeah, I miss them. I miss going into the facilities, but like, obviously you can't have visitors right now. So I'm at home.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So let's talk a little bit about like the past, present, future, and you guys gave, a little bit of an idea of how your company, and you're all at different stages. We were talking about that earlier. So David's company has been around for 10 years. Janna, how long have you been around, and Ronit also?
A little over a year and a half.
Okay.
So we've been live for 2 years. We incorporated 3 years ago.
Oh, okay. So what was it like, and I'll go around with each one of you, and Ronit, I'll just start with you. And what was it like before COVID? And then we'll talk about what's going on now, and then, the future, where you're headed. But like, what was it like in the past?
Absolutely. So we were definitely growing before, but we had to convince people. So our service, our platform connects universities, connects students, connects industry experts and employers, but all of it's virtual, right? So the people that we're selling to, on the one hand, are universities like university career centers, and on the other hand, it's employers. And our argument was that the future of campus recruiting is online, the future of career services is online. And there was a lot of friction there, particularly in the markets that we were operating in. We did a survey of some of the companies, and 69% of them were only recruiting on campus. So they were not recruiting virtually at all. And so before coronavirus, we first had to make the argument as to why it was worthwhile for them to shift some of their processes online, why they should be thinking about virtual. And happy to talk about sort of what's happened in this period of time. But there was definitely a lot. Only now in hindsight do I see how much friction we were operating against, given people's lack of a model. They didn't have a mental model for what was possible. And now all of that has changed.
Yeah, so that's like accelerated everything, right? I mean, it's just like, and now they have no choice. And then Janna, I mean, what was it for you like just before all this happened? And has it, has this like sort of worked to your disadvantage or advantage like it has for some startups?
Yeah, COVID was a huge catalyst for our business. I didn't even, we surpassed every benchmark that we had, or every, goal that we had for this year. The healthcare industry is obviously super innovative, super forward thinking, but surprisingly, there are many processes that are still really antiquated, like staffing and recruitment. So you have some organizations that use headhunters and job boards and things, but I think before COVID, the biggest difference, before COVID, we assumed that provider pool would just be a way for facilities to cover like a one-off shift call in, like if a nurse had to call in, or if they had to go on vacation or maternity leave, then we could help, find a nurse quickly. But when COVID hit, it was an ongoing thing. So there's a constant, or there's a continual need, and it's not just for a shift or two here and there. It's for 6, 12 weeks at a time. So that was a big adjustment for us, going from just filling a few shifts per facility to filling hundreds per facility, and it was a blessing and a curse for our business.
Yeah, and I wonder, like, I mean, when we talk about the future, like, what do you expect going forward? Like, how much of this will be, sustainable? But I'll come back to that. And then, David, you mentioned, like, I mean, you guys have had an impressive, list of clients, some big names that you mentioned, from Walmart to Starbucks. And what has changed for you? Obviously, now with hand sanitizer and thing, as you mentioned, and soap, I mean, that's on everybody's mind. So, like, what changed for you from the past?
So I think the biggest thing for us is, one, when people ask me and they're like, hey, like, this has been a great year for you, I'm like, it's still a global pandemic, right? Like, if things could go back and this didn't happen, even with how fast this has pushed us into the market into places that we weren't selling beforehand, like, I still wish this didn't happen. So thankfully, the story with our brand is, and I have some show and tell here. I wasn't kidding about what's behind me being the bad mistakes that we've done. This is basically what our brand used to look like. It doesn't take anyone with serious CPG knowledge to like look at this and say this is bad. This is better. So we made this change in 2017. We immediately started seeing the brand grow at a much faster clip. So this really took off. We doubled from 17 to 18. We doubled again from 18 to 19, and we were on track with January and February of doubling again. So we were really excited about our growth. We will 11x where we were last year. Now, the only reason that we were able to do that is because we had built a lot of systems that you wouldn't expect to see from, I can share some of these things because it's public, but we were going to be a double-digit $1 million company this year, but just over. And now, times that by the number I just said, the reason we were able to do that is because we have things like stage gate and S&OP and inventory controls. And we also were already vendors with a bunch of these manufacturers. And we also had flexible storage with our 3PL, so our third-party logistics. So it makes things infinitely easier when you're able to call up someone like Wegmans and you're already a vendor with them and they already trust you. And it takes and this is kind of mind-blowing with consumer product goods, but I really mean it. It takes the same amount of effort to ship one pallet as it takes to ship a whole truckload. Same amount of effort, like from the invoicing and the communication. So like we were just in with the right amount of preparation, processes, tools, and team, like we were just set up to provide hand soap and hand sanitizer and antibacterial wipes and everything that we had in the pipeline when all this kicked in.
Yeah, now having all the systems in place is like so important. It just helps you scale, and kind of and just adjust. And then when you're talking to like Wegmans or any of your customer, what's on the forefront of their minds right now, would you say? I mean, it's different for different companies, like Walmart, I mean, yes, isn't retail like Wegman is, but different industries and all that. So what would you say are 2 or 3 things that are on top of people's minds?
So this year has been absolutely crazy in every dimension. Are you talking about what was on their mind in March or what's in their mind now?
I guess presently in the last month or so. Yeah, you're right. That's a good point because things are evolving so quickly, right? At the same time, we kind of, I think, know the next 6 to 12 months is going to be like this. So what would you say is like presently on their minds? What's worrying your customers? Where do they need help?
So it's interesting, right? And I think that it's also not fair. There are certain retailer partners of ours that have done really well, and there's certain ones that have not. And really what it came down to is who was deemed essential during COVID. So there are salons that we do business with that were shut down, and there are grocery stores that are up double digit, sometimes triple digit in what they usually order from us. But for a challenger brand like us, which is what they call like the not Unilevers, the not Procter & Gamble's, the not Colgate Palmolive's, we had massive brand exposure. And thankfully, only the first couple batches of hand sanitizer that we made smelled like tequila. So eventually, like we made a equivalent to or better than what Purell makes, and we had so many people come into the brand through us selling hand sanitizer to retailers across America. But I think everything that's happened this year, I never thought I would expect to see ever. What retailers did, like we had some of our retailers pay us a net 7. It's industry standard that you get paid in 45 days. I talked to various VPs of retailers that are just way above our league. And the reason being is the leverage completely changed. And also what's changing in a supply chain is happening on a day-to-day basis. Everything is just crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I think everybody is in the same boat to some extent, and Janna, I mean, with you, only being in business for under 2 years, I mean, what's on your mind? Are you nervous? Are you worried? I mean, you've seen this growth, like, so that's a good thing, but like, going forward, what's on your mind?
I'm definitely pretty positive. I think that our business, the timing for our business, I think timing is the most important thing for any business. And timing is sort of, it's opportune for us right now. There's definitely this inevitable generational shift happening right now where younger people now dominate the labor market. So control is sort of shifting from the companies to the workers. And I think now more than ever and moving forward, the workforce will sort of demand, more flexibility, more transparency. And so I feel completely positive, and maybe that's like, I don't know, maybe I shouldn't, but I do. And I just want to sort of ride this wave.
Yeah, no, I don't blame you. And Ronit, what are you seeing? I mean, what's the new normal for you? I mean, because as you mentioned, it's accelerated some of this move from physical to kind of virtual and all that. So what are you hearing from your customers?
We're seeing a huge shift. So companies that were entirely office-based, and we're talking about in hubs like Dubai, places like Doha, in the MENA region, they're now going to be 50% remote moving forward. So I think we can all agree that remote work is going to be a sizable part of the work experience. It may not be at this level. So I would certainly anticipate that many people are going to go back to offices, but everything has changed in terms of people's perception about what's possible for remote learning, remote work, particularly at the higher education level. So I think many of us know if you have young kids, you want your kids back in school as soon as possible, that in a safe way. I don't think that pendulum is going to swing. But when it comes to things like career services, recruitment, hiring and work, before were seeing an incredible amount of friction in the markets that we were serving. We operate primarily in the Middle East and North Africa and in India, and all of that has changed. We deal with governments who basically said that so much of their time had been wasted traveling, even traveling halfway across the city for an hour each way, the commutes, where people are really rethinking their time and their efficiency. And from our perspective, that opens up their imagination to hiring talent that may not be in their immediate vicinity, but perhaps if you're, let's say, based in Dubai, you might consider hiring Lebanese talent or Egyptian talent and not just Emirati talent, as an example. The other thing that we didn't expect is that American universities started to turn to us. And we had not anticipated that we would be serving the American market, particularly not at this stage of our growth. But what a lot of American universities discovered was that their international students were in an incredible bind because either they weren't able to come into the country, and so they were suddenly learning remotely, or if they did come into the country, into the United States, they had very little services that were geared towards them. And because we have very diverse global industry experts and employers, suddenly there was an offering for them that universities required. And so suddenly we have Ivy League universities that have turned to us. We're just signing our first Ivy. We have multi-year contracts that we're suddenly signing with incredibly reputable US universities. So that was a market that we didn't think we were going to be tapping anytime soon.
Oh, wow. And I mean, so that actually sounds great. I mean, but have you come across any cuts or anything like that in university programs?
For sure.
Okay.
There's no question. I mean, look, the universities in the United States are, they're in a tough spot because prices have grown exponentially over the years. Many universities are not necessarily viable. I'm originally Canadian, and I can see the discrepancy in pricing between, let's say, studying in Canada versus studying in the United States. So there's no question that there's a reckoning going on in higher education, and there's a fierce debate going on about that. And there's a lot of rethinking that I think has been happening over the last decade and is getting accelerated. However, even for a lot of the vulnerable universities, the millennial generation has graduated, and now many universities, because there are fewer Americans entering into higher education institutions, have been filling those seats with international students. So if they are suddenly not delivering value to their international students, if you're an international student and you're paying $60,000 a year and you're stuck back home and you're in Mumbai and you're basically dialing it in, then you want to be sure that the university is able to deliver other things to you. And so there are certainly cuts at the university level. We see the pain that they're experiencing. It's not an easy time. Career Services is really facing a lot of challenges, and they're going through Herculean efforts to keep people safe and to deal with all of that. But we suddenly moved from a nice to have in some instances to a need to have when it came to serving some demographics within their student population.
Yeah. And then like for all, three of you, is there learning going on other than learning generically what's happening with, the coronavirus and the state of the economy and all that, like with your customers? Are you guys learning anything new? I guess, Janna, like, has anything new surfaced in this? Like, I mean, there's so much craziness going on out there right now,
I think the biggest thing that we've learned is just like workforce preferences. What the workforce really, really wants, because it's different than what we traditionally believe them to want and desire. You know, we thought that they would love to have a full-time job with benefits and 401ks and things like that, but really what they care much more about, like, the culture and the dynamic of where they work. They want feedback from their peers on where they work versus, you know, researching on the company website. They want to be able to have full transparency into where they work. And so we've learned a lot about the workforce, and we've just been really, really excited to sort of appeal to them in a way that accommodates their needs and preferences, and the needs and preferences of the emerging workforce as well, because it's very different than traditional workers.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's going to be a lot of changing in the landscape here. And then David, with with your business growing so fast, I mean, like, how did it all start when, when the COVID, like March around, I mean, because it's been going on since December, January and all that, but in March is when it really started to hit the US in a big way. Like, that's when we all started to kind of wake up here. How did, like, the order start coming in for, like, because being in the soap and how did that all play out?
So we're a weird breed in DC. So we're based in Georgetown, but being in consumer product goods and being here, especially with our name as Soapbox, a lot of people oftentimes are like, "Oh, Soapbox, like political consulting," and we're like, "No, we sell soap." And then people oftentimes are like, "Oh, to the government, like you're a federal contractor, like you make soap for something, like, I don't know." But yeah, it is weird being, a consumer product based company here. So usually when I share these stories, we often feel almost like an alien within the community. But there's a couple that are absolutely hysterical. So it helps that one of our customers that we were courting for quite some time pre-COVID is a very large coffee manufacturer and retail outlet based in Seattle. And they reached out to us in February because they have global operations, and they were like, FYI, start making hand sanitizer. So that helped. We always knew how to make it. It was always in the production pipeline. But things really ramped up the first week of March when Wegmans called us and said, "Hey, we need to put in a 50,000 unit order for liquid hand soap," which isn't that big, or it used to be, when we started, but it isn't that sizable for us now, but enough for us to get on a phone call with our buyer and say, like, yeah, we can absolutely do that. And we're like, by the way, we're going to start making hand sanitizer. And our buyer was like, "Oh, that's great. I'll take $1 million." And we're like, "What? Who?" So once that deal transacted that afternoon, we just started calling all of our retail partners. So we called Ahold, which owns Giant and Stop and Shop and Martin's, and then we called Harris Teeter. Then we called, we know all these individuals, so we just started calling them and saying, "Hey, we're making hand sanitizer. Don't know if you need this." And they were like, "Oh my gosh, how much can you get me now?" But we also only really worked with about 4 different factories pre-COVID, and now we're at 11. So our team, who I could turn the computer and you can see some of them in the office, our team deserves pretty much all the credit. My role, jokingly, is to just make sure that they're caffeinated. But there's a couple articles about how our operations team pulled off supply chain miracles, how we were able to, basically overnight ship pumps from around the world. Some of the things that all of you guys will see if you go to retail stores is that surface disinfectant wipes are still nowhere to be found. So Lysol and Clorox that's going to continue to be out until probably the second quarter of 2021.
Wow.
I mean, the same thing with liquid hand soap. You see liquid hand soap without pumps on retailer shelves, which is crazy to think that is even acceptable from a consumer perspective. And that's because trying to find a pump right now anywhere in the world is really difficult. And the reason that's so difficult is because to manufacture a pump takes 3-4 times as long to then just make a disc tap. So there's a bunch of nuances where, thankfully over the years we've hired people from Nestle and Unilever and PDC and Estee Lauder to where, you know, our team has the experience in how to source that. But it also just takes a ton of ingenuity and creativity to get over all the various obstacles that have been thrown our way. Some funny stories. Someone tried to fraud us out of buying a semi truck full of ethyl alcohol. That was funny. And then let's see, we also had to buy 23 tankers of ethyl alcohol within 30 minutes, or else someone else was going to buy them. That was crazy. Never bought 23 semi trucks full of ethyl alcohol before in my life. But there were tons of moments where, like, everything that could go wrong went wrong. Everything that we thought, you know, was going to happen this year has completely changed. How buyers, you know, became true partners with us. Like, the weirdest thing happened where, like, some of our buyers just started texting me, and oftentimes it's really difficult to try to get a hold of a buyer when you're like a challenger brand like us. But just given the relationship that we built, like, yeah, we were on texting basis. Like, it was the weirdest sliding into my DMs I've ever had, of where some buyers of like other major retailers like would just, like, you know, like send me a message via Instagram. I'm like, first off, you cannot put in, like, you know, this much money of an order via Instagram. Like, please email me. So yeah, it's crazy, and it's still crazy.
No, it's crazy times. And I guess I'm glad you told us those stories. I guess when you need to get in touch with customers, you can't, but when they need you, yeah, they'll find you. And Jenna, I mean, for you too, I mean, like, did you see like a surge on requests for nurses as this thing started to ramp up? How did that, you know, play out?
Yeah, I was a little nervous. I thought that it would actually have a negative impact on provider pool because our nurses work in multiple facilities within the same week, sometimes multiple facilities within the same day. And so I thought that facilities would be a little bit reluctant to book nurses through the platform, considering like how many places they work. And there was a huge surge. We've grown over 200% like month over month since April. And so it was a positive effect versus negative for sure.
Yeah.
Everyone needs nurses right now. And I think, unfortunately, many of the nurses, so it's about split. You have some nurses who take a ton of pride right now in working on the front lines of healthcare. They love it. They want to care for patients and during these really, really challenging times. But then you have other nurses who are unfortunately a little bit fearful, and they feel bad because they are healthcare professionals, but you know, they have families, or maybe they take care of elderly or immunocompromised family members. And so we've had some nurses sort of step away from healthcare during this time, which further increased the demand when it was already high. So demand has definitely increased, and I think that it'll continue to increase in the coming years.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then hopefully for all of you guys, I mean, you're getting more and more brand recognition too as this demand is growing, you know, so it's a good thing. Even with Ronit, you mentioned how the US, you know, universities started contacting you, and, you know, you guys weren't ready for that. So for the audience, you know, we've answered a couple of your questions, but we're in the second half, so please feel free to post your questions, and we're going to continue discussing some other stuff here. But so, you know, even though it's been a positive impact, like, what are the top, you know, 2 or 3 challenges for you guys in the next 3 to 6 months, knowing what we know now about COVID, that this is kind of going to be with us till the middle of next year at least, you know, or longer maybe?
I can start.
Yep.
So, you know, our plan initially had been to really focus on employer recruitment for 2020. So the idea originally was bring on a critical mass of university students and recent graduates of fresh talent, then bring on the employers, and that the majority of our revenue was going to come from employers paying annual subscriptions or event-based subscriptions to recruit. And when coronavirus hit, it hit some of the regions that we serve a little bit earlier, I would say, than here in the US. And one of the first things to get frozen was recruitment, early stage recruitment in particular. There was a lot of uncertainty. And so one of the things that we did was we surveyed our partners. We actually found that 80% of them had to cancel their career fairs because of what was going on. And so we ended up pivoting and hosting what it turns out was the first MENA-wide, Middle East and North Africa-wide virtual career fair, where we brought in top employers from Amazon and Microsoft and Ernst & Young and others in the region to come and recruit. But what we did was we actually waived the fees for them to participate, because as we were talking to all the HR managers that we'd been building relationships with, we were hearing that there was, many companies were declaring freezes on, like Google, for example, froze all of their hiring, and others that were being very, very careful about their budgets. And one of the last things they were looking for were fresh graduates, right? Because when in a downturn, what you want are the people that can execute to, increase your revenue, keep you afloat, et cetera. And so we realized that we suddenly became a must-have on the university side, but on the company side, there was more friction. So what we did was we eliminated as much friction as possible. Also, just from an ethical standpoint, we wanted to ensure that students who were already operating in a region that had the highest youth unemployment rate in the world before COVID-19, who were graduating into the worst economy since the Great Depression, would have access to employers and employment and job possibilities. And so we wanted to waive that friction. We ended up having about 10,000 students come through the fair. It was a big success. NPS scores were incredibly high. Most of the companies plan to recruit on Localized in the future. So it was great. And I would say at the same time, we've definitely had to rethink our revenue strategy this year to be more on the university and sort of supply side of the talent equation. Certainly having some on the demand side, but recalibrating based on the needs. Whereas for the universities, it was urgent that they take career services online. It was urgent that they serve their students virtually. And we had, luckily the tools between alumni management, career services, et cetera, for them to be able to do so. So I would say recalibrating, and we don't see this as long-term, right? Like we do imagine, we're not anticipating 2021 is going to be a very, we're not going back to normal in 2021, but we think, 2021, we can continue to grow because of what we're doing. But 2022, we do anticipate that the labor market is going to start to get tighter. There is going to be more recruiting, and particularly in the markets that we serve, it's been so analog anyway that the move just to digital itself is going to be able to sustain our continued growth.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Janna, we've got a question for you, like on, how quickly did you scale, how were you able to scale your scheduling so quickly?
Yeah, I was just like going to type it in chat, but thanks for the question, Elizabeth. My focus prior to COVID was on locking in supply. So I had been recruiting nurses into our marketplace for about a year when COVID hit. So the supply side was actually ready, and COVID sort of brought the demand. And we do streamline each process through our tech. So we don't use any human schedulers for the nursing side. It is completely self-service, low touch onboarding for them. But on the facility side or the healthcare organization side, it is still pretty high touch. We have relationships with them. But yeah, I had the nurses ready, and I was actually hoping to, or trying to strategize how I would start onboarding facilities. And COVID sort of eliminated the barriers to entry for me with new customers. So yeah.
And no, thank you. And like, do you, Janna and Ronit, I mean, do you guys have any interesting stories you've experienced in the last couple of months? Not the 23 truckloads like David, but I don't know if you had that kind of a problem, but anything interesting that's happened? You're like, wow, that only could happen during a pandemic,
Yeah, so we had a facility who was posting shifts, pretty regularly. And when I didn't see any for a week, I gave them a call. And I learned that the administrator was actually in ICU with COVID. And so a few days later, I reached out to the facility, and the director of nursing was in ICU with COVID. And many of the nurses that were working the floor had COVID. So it's extreme. It was very, very emotionally taxing. You drive up to a facility and you'll see family members with lawn chairs outside of their loved ones' bedrooms because they can't visit. So they'll have complete like, visits with their grandmas or their, their parents through their bedroom window. So it's just hard. I've definitely cried a lot just because we serve, those that are on the front lines, and then also those that are directly impacted by COVID. But yeah, I have really interesting stories, great stories, and some horror stories.
Yeah,
For sure.
no, I mean, when this all started, watching on the news how people were dying over FaceTime and all that, video, that was sad. I mean, it's just like, and Ronit, I mean, you guys, I mean, you've experienced a bunch too with the US universities, expanding this and that, and, like anything interesting that's happened in the last couple of months that way?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, one thing that was fascinating to watch was how different countries adjusted and adapted to what was going on. And it had nothing to do with economics or how developed the country was or wasn't in terms of their economy. Some countries shifted into gears, had a mindset about adjusting, and others really froze. So I would say that was fascinating. The second piece for us is we have a distributed team. So we have team members in Bangalore, in Cairo, in Ramallah, Amman, Silicon Valley, and here. And it was the first time during lockdown that we were all in the same boat. Like every single one of us, when we were having our meetings, there was an extra level of commonality during the lockdown where everybody was sort of in the same place. And I'm not happy about that at all. But I do think that geographies and boundaries have really shifted. So it was, for us, it actually was an opportunity to tap into industry experts that normally are at conference after conference and traveling so much, and suddenly they had time for students. So, we had some of the top, like the equivalent of the Steve Jobses of certain regions that came on and spoke to students, and we had them interviewed by students. And because they were all sitting at home. And so, we thought, why not? Let's just have them. We have the access and we have the social capital. Let's extend that. And so I do think that there were some silver lining. I think, like David, of course, I can't wait until this is over and behind us. And I don't wish it on anyone. We have a team member whose parents in Syria actually have COVID right now. So it's a very real situation for our team. We've had team members having scares in different parts of the world with different levels of infrastructure and medical facilities to be able to deal with the situation. But there are certainly silver linings. And I think I've been very impressed in a lot of places with the speed at which governments and universities and employers adapted to the new normal.
Yeah, the speed has been interesting because I was talking to somebody yesterday and they were like, why weren't we able to move at this speed before, because we still have the same people, but it's kind of like when you collectively focus on something, then things move so much faster, and then in times of crisis especially. So let's start, wrapping up this panel. I'm going to go around to each one of you guys. If you had like a couple of takeaways, to pass on to other entrepreneurs that might not be as lucky as you guys have, because this has worked, well for you. And then, but what would be the 2 or 3 takeaways, whether somebody's doing well or not, how to grow in the midst of this chaos? I'll start with David, I guess alphabetically. I'll just go around first name.
Well, it depends on your sector. It depends on, what category you're in. I'd say the best thing that I could to any entrepreneur out there is that when there's gigantic changes in the marketplace, if you can move fast and hopefully you have a great team around you, then there is opportunity to provide a solution for people. I think one of the things that was really humbling for us is that not only do we have a component where we're able to give, where we've been telling people to wash their hands with clean water and soap for more than 20 seconds for 10 years, and 9 of those years no one really cared. So I think there was definitely a moment early on where, like, okay, with a brand literally called Soapbox, there has never been a time for us to stand up on that and really get in the trenches as much as we can to try to ensure that people have access to healthy hygiene around the world. So this year we'll be able to donate well over 12 million bars of soap to local homeless shelters and food pantries all across the United States, as well as we're working in pretty much every region in the world through a collection of 501c3 partners that we are so privileged to work with. But I'd say to everyone listening and those you interact with beyond this webinar is that there's opportunity, and pivoting and or getting creative about what your business can take on or what your venture can solve for customers is what it takes now.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of pivoting going on, as we mentioned a couple of times, in this. Janna, what would your takeaways be?
I would just say, just be agile, be adaptable, test. Don't be afraid to pivot. Don't be afraid to try things that are outside of the box. Get a set of mentors who have, industry knowledge or, who are experts in different areas, and just be sure to bounce ideas off of them. It is hard to test fast. It's hard to get a ton of data really, really quickly, but I would just say, don't be afraid to pivot. Don't be afraid to try and get a good set of mentors to help you.
Yeah, makes sense. Ronit?
I would say this is a time where people are really open to creativity and to doing things differently, whether it's investors. There's a lot of openness to just testing and figuring it out. So number one, not to be afraid of that kind of testing and experimentation. Call it that. Say, I'm going to pilot or I'm going to try X and see what happens, number one. Second thing is that it really helps in a pandemic to be doing something you love. And so if you're working on something that you're really excited about or that you feel is giving you joy, that's a great way to pour all of that anxious energy into something that has a focus and a direction. And if you're finding that there's just too much friction or it's not, I've actually had a couple of frank conversations with some friends who are entrepreneurs who've just decided to, they're actually going to shut down what they're doing because it's not working for them. And that's okay too. So I would say, if you love what you're doing, if it's moving, or if you feel like it has the potential, do it, experiment, be nimble, do all the things that David and Janna said. And if you're finding that friction is just eating away at you, it's also okay to then make a different decision. And now is a great time in whatever direction to just be decisive about it.
Yeah, no, I love what all three of you just said, because I mean, that's at least for me personally too, starting Startup Sidekick, it took a year to kind of come to that. And I'm so glad because I'm really enjoying it. And with Janna, I mean, MVPs, testing, I think that just applies across startup, right? Because I was interviewing somebody and they're like, why do you only use MVPs in products, right? When you talk about startups, MVP in marketing, test out something quickly, MVP. So yeah, testing out. And, David, obviously you've been doing this for a long time and you've had a lot of success. And yeah, I think just being a great leader and supporting your team and all that. So this was wonderful, really great panel. I appreciate everybody attending. Thank you so much, and good luck to everybody, managing your growth in this chaos. Thank you. Have a great day. And be sure to attend next 3 days. We got lots of good sessions going on here, so thank you.